The frost came early that October. It claimed the fence posts and the pump handle without asking. This county never gave warnings, but this year, it brought 3 riders through her gate. The first horse had silver on its tack. The man who stepped down smiled like the outcome was already written. A satchel followed, and eyes that counted everything they saw. She waited in the center of the yard, tall, still. The wind stopped moving. The creek pulled its sound back. The barn roof she had just fixed held its breath. He tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he said softly, "we have a problem with the deed to this land." Her fingers found the notebook inside her coat, the one she had ridden through the dark to find, the one that might be the only thing left between her and the men who had come to take it all. The frost came early that October. It always did in Cimarron County. It didn't ask permission. It didn't warn anyone. It simply arrived overnight and left its signature on everything: the grass, the fence posts, the iron pump handle. Outside the barn, the cracked leather of work gloves left out too long. Maren Voss was already outside when it came. She'd been up since 4. Not because something woke her. Because something always needed doing before the sun decided to show up and make demands of its own. The garlic needed banking. The east fence post near the creek had been leaning 3 degrees wrong for a week. And the barn roof, the southwest corner specifically, had developed a gap she could see light through, which meant she could also see rain through it, come November. One thing at a time. That was the only philosophy that worked out here. She started with the fence post. Maren Voss was 35 years old and 6 feet 2 inches tall. She had been both of those things for a while now, and the world had never quite decided what to do with either fact. The height came from her father's side. Wilhelm Voss had been a blacksmith out of Frankfurt, big-handed and quiet, who'd crossed the Atlantic in 1851 with $300, a set of tongs, and the particular stubbornness of a man who'd decided he was done being told what was possible. He'd settled in eastern Kansas, built a forge, married a woman almost as tall as himself. Their daughter had inherited the height, the stubbornness. The forge hardened hands, not the forge. That went to her brother. But this land, these 320 acres along Stone Creek in Cimarron County, this had been hers and Heinrich's. Registered 1869 under the Homestead Act. 5 years of proving up. 5 years of breaking ground that didn't want to be broken, planting crops in dirt that thought of itself as desert, building some fences closes across a landscape that treated wood like a joke. They'd done it. Heinrich Voss and Maren Voss. Their names on the deed, their hands in the soil, and then the summer of 1874 came, and the cholera moved through southern Kansas the way fire moves through dry grass, fast, indiscriminate, finished before anyone understood what had happened. Heinrich was gone by August. Maren was still here. 3 years later, she was still here. Different herd, smaller, then gone entirely when the dry season stacked up back to back, and she had to choose between the cattle and the land. She chose the land, sold every head, kept every acre. People in Cedar Falls thought she'd gone stubborn with grief. She thought she'd gone clear. The south fence post went in straight on the 3rd attempt. She didn't curse the first 2 tries. She just reset her grip, repositioned her body, accounting for the angle of the ground, which sloped 2 degrees northeast if you knew where to look, and drove the post down to proper depth, 6 inches deeper than most men bothered with. Her father had taught her that. The fence that falls, he'd said, always falls, because the post was lazy at the bottom. She tamped the earth, tested it with both hands. Solid mauve to the next one. The sky above her was the color of old pewter, low clouds moving in from the northwest. She calculated the weather the way she calculated everything, methodically, without drama, with an eye toward what it would cost her if she was wrong. Rain by Thursday, maybe Wednesday. She needed the barn roof before Wednesday. She heard the horse before she saw it. Single rider, coming from the North Trail, along the creek line, unhurried. The kind of pace a man uses when he's looking at things. Not just passing them. Maren didn't stop working. She drove the next post, tamped it, tested it. The rider came around the stand of dead cottonwoods at the property's northwest edge and stopped at the fence line. She could see him in her peripheral vision. She could see the horse too, a dark bay, well-muscled, the kind of horse that had been worked hard over real terrain and knew the difference. She finished with the post. Then she picked up the post hole digger, carried it to the next mark, and turned around. The man was watching her. Not the way men sometimes watched Maren Voss, with that particular cocktail of discomfort and fascination that her height tended to produce in strangers. This was different. This was the way a man watches something he's trying to take the measure of. He was broad through the shoulders, deep chest. The kind of physical density that comes from decades of actual outdoor labor. Not a few seasons of ranch work. His coat was good canvas, heavily worn at the cuffs. His hat had been rained on many more times than it had been sheltered. He sat his horse with the complete stillness of someone who had spent years in country where moving wrong could cost you something. He was, she estimated, about 45. Maybe a few years older. He was also, and she noticed this the way she noticed all practical information, calmly and without sentiment, roughly 5 feet 11, which meant he was looking at her across 3 inches of air she occupied, and he did not. He didn't adjust his expression about it. That was unusual. You're on private property, she said. I am, 2 words. Flat. Acknowledging the fact without apologizing for the trespass. North Trail goes around, she said. It does, he said. I wasn't on the North Trail. She looked at him. He looked at her. Elias Cord, he said. She knew the name. Everyone in Cimarron County knew the name. 280,000 acres. 10,000 head. A reputation built less on display and more on the fact that what Elias Cord said would happen generally happened. Maren Voss, she said. And she went back to digging. He didn't leave. She'd half expected him to. Men of his position usually delivered whatever they'd come to deliver and departed. Their time was performing itself for someone even if no audience existed. Instead, he dismounted, tied his horse to the fence rail, her fence rail, and he did it without asking, and walked toward the creek. Maren watched this from the corner of her eye. He crouched at the bank where the small earthen dam sat, the one Heinrich had built in the spring of 1871 to direct water toward the easternmost pasture, the one that had been slowly giving way on its western side for the past 2 seasons. Cord studied it, not casually. With the focused attention of a man calculating something, he straightened up. Came back. That dam goes, he said. You lose maybe 30% of your eastern flow. Won't matter much to you now, without a herd. He said it plainly, not as cruelty, as information. I know, she said. Matters to me, he said. And there it was. He explained it without preamble. His eastern cattle range. The winter water supply. Stone Creek was the primary source for 6,000 head of his northern herd between November and March, when the secondary sources froze or ran too low. The creek ran south from the higher ground, through the northwestern corner of her property, before it opened up into his grazing land downstream. If the dam on her property failed, which it was going to, by his assessment, before the end of the month, the water would divert, spread out across the flat ground to the west, drain into the dry wash instead of staying in the creek channel. His cattle would be working for water that wasn't there. I'm not asking you to fix it, he said. I'm asking for the right to fix it, and to run a maintenance easement through the northwest corner, seasonal, specific to the creek channel. In exchange for what, she said. Not a question exactly, more like the opening of a door, south fence line. 3 sections down, 2 more failing. Full replacement, good posts, correct depth, double wire where it borders Cooper's property. And the barn roof, southwest corner. Maren set down the post hole digger. She turned and looked at him fully. This was, she understood, a business proposition, not a rescue, not charity in a work shirt. He needed something from her land. He was offering something specific in exchange. He had calculated what her property needed and priced his access against it. Write it down, she said. He pulled a notebook from his coat, flat-backed, well-used, wrote while standing in the field without hunting for a surface to lean on, handed it to her. She read it. Here is what Maren Voss noticed. The terms were fair. More than fair, honestly. The fence and roof work would have cost her $40 in materials and a week of labor she couldn't spare. He was offering a full crew. But there was a clause at the bottom: water access and maintenance rights along Stone Creek. Northwest section, subject to expansion of scope as operationally required, at the discretion of the easement holder. Subject to expansion, at his discretion. She read that line 3 times. What it meant, if you read it carefully, and she always read carefully, was that Cord could, at some future point, decide that his operational requirements had changed and extend his access rights across more of her property, without renegotiating, without her agreement. The phrase, as operationally required, was doing a great deal of work in that sentence, and all of it was working in his favor. He might not have intended it that way, or he might have. Either way, she wasn't signing it. This clause, she said. She pointed to it. Subject to expansion at your discretion. That removes my ability to contest changes to the easement scope. He looked at the clause. He was quiet for a moment. You're right, he said. No argument, no justification, no explanation of what he'd meant by it. Just, you're right. He took the notebook back, crossed out the clause, wrote a replacement. Water access and maintenance rights limited to the Northwest Creek Channel, defined as the area within 15 feet of the existing waterway on either bank, with scope changes requiring written agreement of both parties. He handed it back. She read the new language. Then she did something she hadn't planned to do. She added a line of her own. Took the pencil he'd been using. He handed it over without being asked, and wrote at the bottom: any damage to creek banks or riparian vegetation caused by easement holders' cattle or crew to be restored to prior condition within 30 days of documented damage. She handed it back. He read her addition. Reasonable, he said. Anne signed his name underneath. Marin signed below his. She didn't make anything of the moment. It was a business agreement. It had taken 12 minutes and corrected itself once. That was, in her experience, a reasonably efficient transaction. Crew will come tomorrow, he said. First light. I'll be up, she said. He looked at her. One of those brief looks that was actually several things at once, though she couldn't have named all of them at the time. Then he untied his horse, mounted with the ease of a man who'd done it 10,000 times, and rode back the way he'd come, along the creek line, without looking back. Marin watched him go for exactly 2 seconds. Then she picked up the post-hole digger and went back to work. The crew arrived at first light, 4 men, loaded wagon, rope, post stock, wire. The kind of material weight that someone wasn't interested in doing this job halfway. The man at the front was broad and weathered, somewhere in his late 40s. He introduced himself as Aldrich. He did not shake her hand. He looked at the fence line, looked at her, and said, "Which end do you want to start?" "South post to the creek corner," she said. "That section has the worst lean." He nodded, started unloading. Marin went inside, changed into her heavier work canvas, and came back out. She pulled a post from the wagon without asking if that was acceptable. Aldrich glanced at her once, assigned her to the east section. Working alongside the crew's most experienced hand, a quiet man named Ferris who had forearms like stacked rope and a tendency to hum something low and tuneless while he worked. She fell into the rhythm of it. Post, set, tamp, wire. Post, set, tamp, wire. The morning was cold and clear. Her breath made shapes in the air. Her shoulders started to ache around 9 o'clock in that good, reliable way that told her she was actually doing something rather than managing something. Around midday, she noticed Ferris watching her pull a post she'd miscounted. She'd planned for 6 along the lower section, but the ground had shifted more than she'd measured. 7 were needed. She went back to the wagon, pulled the extra post herself. Ferris said nothing. She came back with the post, set it, drove it in. He went back to humming. Ilias Cord arrived on the second afternoon. Not with the crew, separately on the dark bay, alone. He tied up at the rail and walked the finished sections first, checking the post depths with a practiced eye. He pressed his boot against 2 of the posts. They didn't move. He came to where she was working. She was on the last run of the east section, tightening wire with a stretcher. Her back was to him. "South wall's done," he said. "I know." I did the south wall this morning. A pause. Aldrich said you set 9 posts. Needed 9. I measured wrong. Section was longer than I marked. Another pause. This one had a different texture. You measured again and pulled the extra post yourself? It needed to be done, she said. So I did it. He was quiet. Then I brought the lease. She stopped working, turned around. He held out 2 folded documents. She took both, unfolded one. Read it standing there in the east pasture, with one boot propped on a freshly set post. It was the water easement agreement from the previous day, formalized by hand into a proper lease document. Her addition was included. The limiting language was included. The 30-day restoration clause was there, word for word. She turned to the second page and stopped. There was a clause she hadn't asked for. Paragraph 4, she said. Drainage management, he said. Cattle crossing without controlled approach damages the bank in 2 seasons. That clause requires my crew to install branch and rock deflectors at the main crossing point. Protects the bank, which protects your water flow. She looked at it. He had added something that benefited her, something she hadn't thought to ask for. Something that would have taken her a season of damage and a county agricultural almanac to figure out on her own. You added this before I could ask for it, she said. I added it because it's correct. He said. She folded the document, looked at him. Why, she said. Why what? Why come back yourself? You have a foreman. You have crew. He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the remaining cottonwoods along the creek. I inspect my water rights, personally, he said. Always have. She studied him. He didn't look away, Pen, she said. He handed to her one from his coat pocket. She signed both copies, handed one back. He signed the other. That evening, Marin sat at the kitchen table with the ledger. The lamp was low. Outside, the temperature was dropping fast. She could hear the creek, which she could always hear when the wind was from the north. She opened to the current page, wrote cord. October 14, lease signed, drainage clause, added without request. Practical, man. Careful with terms, worth watching. She closed the ledger. The fire in the hearth was built down to coals. She was banking it for the night. Last task, always last. When she heard the horse, not Aldrich's crew. They'd packed up at dusk, said they'd finish the north run tomorrow and the barn roof the day after. This wasn't a workhorse arriving. This was a single animal, moving in from the eastern trail at an unhurried pace that had nothing to do with the particular rhythms of ranch work. Marin went to the window, lantern light in the yard. A man she didn't know, dismounting with ease of someone who spent a lot of time, dismounting in strangers' yards and had never once been asked to remount and leave. Medium height. Good coat, too good for this kind of country, too new, too clean at the hem. A horse with silver-trimmed tack that had never seen a real working trail in its life. He looked at the house, looked at the lamp in the window. He knew she was watching. He'd expected her to be. He knocked anyway. Marin opened the door. Miss Voss. He removed his hat, held it at his side with the practiced gesture of a man who understood that small courtesies created small trust. My name is Devlin Harp. I represent several land interests in the region, and I've been authorized to come speak with you directly. He had dark eyes that collected information the way a ledger collected numbers, quickly, without expression. Storing everything directly, she said. About your property. Marin leaned against the doorframe. She was a full head taller than him, which was not something she typically noticed or dwelled on, but which arranged itself in the air between them in a way she thought was probably useful. It's late, she said. I apologize for the hour. I've been riding since Cedar Falls. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the patient expression of a man who had calculated that patience was his most effective current tool. She stepped aside. He sat across from her at the kitchen table. He did not look around the room the way some visitors did, taking inventory, calculating poverty or resilience or desperation from the contents of a kitchen. He kept his eyes on her, which was either courtesy or strategy, and she had not yet decided which. He knew her name. He knew her acreage. He knew she'd sold her herd in 1875. He knew the exact amount she'd received. She had not told him any of this. He laid a document on the table. $1,500. Clean sale, immediate close. Deed transfer within 30 days. Marin looked at the document. She did not pick it up. No, she said. Harp nodded slowly, as if she'd said something worth considering. That's above current market rate for the area, he said. By about 20%. I know what the market rate is, she said. Of course you do. A pause. The property is under easement, she said. Water rights and creek access, signed and notarized, Elias Cord. Current, through the season. Something moved through his expression, not surprise. Something more like recalibration. Easements are limited arrangements. Miss Voss, this one is in writing, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his document, folded it back precisely, and returned it to the inside pocket of his coat. I understand, he said. He replaced his hat, stood. I'll leave you to your evening. He moved toward the door, stopped, did not turn around. I'll be in the county through the end of the month, he said. If your circumstances change, they won't, she said. Of course, he said again, and left. Marin listened to his horse cross the yard and take the east trail. Then she went to her ledger. She didn't write much, just. Devlin Harp, October 15, land acquisition, knew the herd sale price, knew the acreage number without asking. This man studied me before he came. She set down her pen. He knew the price. That detail was the one that stayed. Because the herd sale had been 3 years ago, a private transaction. The kind of thing that lived in one ledger and one bill of sale, and nowhere else, unless someone had specifically gone looking for it. People who went looking for that kind of information before making an introduction were not multiple making simple offers. They were people who needed to know the exact shape of your difficulty before they walked through your door. She didn't sleep well that night. The barn roof took a day and a half. Aldrich's crew found the gap in the southwest corner, and a second problem further along the ridge, a run of boards that had been compromised by the same freeze-thaw cycle and would have failed by February. They replaced both sections. Marin worked the lumber from below, measuring and cutting. Ferris worked from above, setting and nailing. They finished the ridge run by mid-afternoon on the second day. Aldrich came down and stood in the barn looking up. South section will need revisiting in 2 seasons, he said. That wood's thinner, I know, Marin said. I'll replace it myself. He looked at her. You know carpentry, he said. My father ran a blacksmith shop, she said. You run a blacksmith shop, you learn to fix everything, or you pay someone else to fix everything. And my father had a strong opinion about which of those options built more capable people. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. Cord said, You'd know more about this property than we would, he said. Said to listen if you spoke. Marin looked at him. He said that before you arrived, she said, day before the crew came out. Said she'll know the land better than the maps. Don't correct her on it. Marin absorbed that. She turned and walked back to the barn door, looking out at the yard. The fence sections were finished and true. The barn roof was solid. The creek easement was signed, and somewhere between the post hole digger and the ledger page, and Elias Cord, crossing out a clause she'd caught and writing her counterlanguage back in without hesitation, something in the arrangement had become something else. She couldn't name it exactly. She wasn't sure she needed to yet. Devlin Harp came back 5 days later. This time he didn't come at night. He came mid-morning, when the light was clear and the yard was visible from the road. He brought a different horse, working tack this time, deliberately chosen. And he brought a man in a dark suit who carried a satchel. Marin was in the garden, banking the last of the garlic rows in straw for the winter. She heard them come, stood up. Did not go to meet them. Let them come to her, Ms. Voss, Harp said. I apologize for not sending word ahead. She looked at the man with the satchel. This is Mr. Aldisfin, Harp said. He's an attorney. Marin set down her straw fork. She stood at her full height in the October light, which meant she was looking down at both of them, which meant the particular geometry of this conversation had already been arranged in one direction before a word was said. I'm listening, she said. What Harp said, and what Fenn confirmed, in the careful language of a man who had practiced the exact measure of threat that stayed inside Zolbulm's. Was this the land registration filed in March of 1869? Under the Homestead Act, a valid claim required two witnesses to the applicant's signature. The original Cimarron County record showed only one witness, a man named Elbert Wicks, a county surveyor who had since died. The standard process required two. The second witness, if there had been one, had not been recorded in the county file, which meant technically, legally. According to the letter of the Homestead Act as it was written, the original claim had a procedural deficiency that could be challenged in the Cimarron County Land Court. It was not certain that such a challenge would succeed, Fenn said carefully. But it was not certain that it would fail. Harp said nothing while his attorney explained this. He watched Marin's face. She gave him nothing to read. When Fenn finished, she said, "You're telling me there was an error in the county filing. A potential deficiency," Fenn said. "Made by whom?" The recording process at the time was. "Made by whom?" she said again. Fenn adjusted his collar. The county clerk's office of record in 1869 has since been found to have had several clerical inconsistencies. So the county may have made an error in recording my claim. A pause. "That's one interpretation," Fenn said. "And your interpretation," Marin said, looking at Harp, "is that someone with resources should offer to resolve the difficulty by purchasing the property before it becomes a legal matter." Harp tilted his head very slightly. "I'm simply making sure you have complete information," he said. "The offer remains at $1,500. Marin looked at them both. She said, "I have 7 days, Harp. I can offer 10. 7 is fine," she said. She picked up her straw fork, went back to the garlic. She didn't look up when they left. She banked the last 3 rows, pressed the straw flat, stood and checked the even spacing with her eye. Then she went inside and set a kettle on. And while the water heated, she stood at the window and thought, the Homestead Act. 2 witnesses required. 1 recorded. She had been there that day. She had been 22 years old, and she had stood beside Heinrich at the county clerk's office in Cedar Falls. And there had been, she was almost certain, 2 people present who had watched them sign. Almost certain, because it was 1869, and she had been 22 and newly married. And the most important fact of that day had been the land, not the paperwork. Heinrich had handled the paperwork. Heinrich always handled the paperwork. He was meticulous about it. He kept records of everything, records. She left the kettle, went to the bedroom, to the trunk at the foot of the bed, the old pine trunk that had come from Frankfurt with her father, and been passed to her at her wedding because it was the largest thing the family owned, and it made sense for it to go with the person who had the most land to put things on. She lifted the lid, Heinrich's things. She hadn't moved them. She hadn't been ready to move them, and then time had passed, and moving them had stopped feeling urgent in either direction. She began carefully going through the layers, his winter coat, his survey maps, a folder of correspondence with the County Agricultural Extension from 1872, a small box containing his father's watch, stopped at 4:17, and at the bottom, beneath a piece of canvas that had been used to protect something flat, a field notebook, dark green cover. His handwriting. On the front, H. Voss Field Records, 1868 through 1869. She sat down on the floor with it. She opened it carefully. The pages were dry and precise. Heinrich's handwriting was small and even. The handwriting of a man who had been taught that words cost something and should be placed accordingly. Survey measurements, soil notes, water levels along Stone Creek through the winter of 1868. Crop yield estimates. Then March 1869, she found the entry dated March 14th, County Clerk's Office, Cedar Falls. Claim registration completed. Witness 1, E. Wicks, County Surveyor. Witness 2, Emmett Cruz, Blacksmith, Cedar Falls. Both present, both signed. Clerk Harmon recorded. And below it, in the cramped, careful notation Heinrich used for documents of importance, a signature. Emmett Kraus, written in a different hand than Heinrich's. Slightly irregular. The signature of a man with working hands, not trained to a pen, but there, right there, on page 47 of a field notebook that had spent 3 years at the bottom of a trunk, because Marin Marin hadn't been ready to go through it. Heinrich had recorded the second witness himself, in his field notebook, not the county ledger, because Heinrich always kept his own records, because he never trusted a single copy of anything that mattered, because he had been the son of a man who had lost everything once and rebuilt it and lost it again. And what that family had learned was that the only record you could truly rely on was the one you kept yourself. Marin sat on the floor for a long time. She turned the page forward and back. Read the entry again. Looked at the signature. Emmett Krause. Blacksmith. Cedar Falls. She didn't know if he was still alive. Didn't know if he'd still be in Cedar Falls after 8 years. Didn't know if a man his age would remember the shape of a day that had probably looked like an ordinary errand to him. But she knew he'd been there, and she knew his name, and she knew where Cedar Falls was. She got up off the floor, set the notebook carefully on the kitchen table, opened to page 47, made the tea she'd forgotten about, sat down, opened her ledger to a new page and wrote, October 21, 1877. Harp came with a lawyer. Said the 1869 registration may have a deficiency. Second witness not recorded in county files. Heinrich's field notebook. March 14, 1869. Second witness Emmett Krause. Blacksmith, Cedar Falls. Signature present if Krause is alive and can confirm. The deficiency does not exist. Cedar Falls. 22 miles. I can make the ride in one day. She looked at what she'd written. He dead, one more line. The land is mine. Always was. The paperwork just needs to remember that. Outside, the temperature dropped another 4 degrees before midnight. The frost came back. It always did in Cimarron County. It came and it covered everything. The garlic rows, the new fence posts, the repaired barn roof, the iron pump handle, with the same thin, impartial coat of white. And inside at the kitchen table, with Heinrich's notebook open and her ledger beside it, Marin Voss sat, with both hands flat on the table, and looked at the evidence her husband had left her. Not by plan, not because he'd known she would need it, just because he had been the kind of man who wrote everything down, because careful people create their own luck, sometimes years before they need it, and sometimes. The person who loves you most leaves you exactly what you need, in exactly the right place, at exactly the moment you finally learn to look. She closed the notebook gently, set it beside the deed on the wall, blew out the lamp, and went to sleep. She rode out before the county woke up. 4:30 in the morning, dark still thick, stars doing their slow work overhead. The horse, a gray mare named Salt, sturdy and unsentimental, the last animal Marin hadn't sold, moved steady down the Cedar Falls road without being pushed. 22 miles. Marin had calculated it the night before. Cedar Falls and back in a single day, if she left early enough and didn't stop for anything that wasn't essential. She'd packed bread and dried venison in her coat pocket, water in the canteen, Heinrich's field notebook, wrapped in canvas and tucked inside her saddlebag. The notebook was the whole point. Everything else was just miles. She hadn't told anyone she was going, not because there was anyone to tell. Aldrich and his crew had finished the barn roof 2 days prior and returned to Cord's main ranch. The nearest neighbor, old Clarence Pryor, whose property sat 3 miles east along the creek, was a man who communicated almost exclusively through fence placement and the occasional hostile glance. And Cord. She could have told Cord. She thought about it, riding through the dark. She thought about it the way she thought about most things. Methodically, without drama, turning the idea over to check its underside. He would have offered to come. She was almost certain of that, not certain, almost, and she would have said no, because this was her land and her notebook and her husband's handwriting and her problem to solve. Because the moment someone else rode beside her to fix it, it became something slightly different. A joint effort, a rescue with better manners. She didn't want a rescue with the better manners. She wanted her land so. Salt, the road. 4:30 in the morning, just her Cedar Falls announced itself through smell before it announced itself through sight. Wood smoke, livestock, the particular damp earth scent of a town built near water. By the time the first buildings came into view, The sky had gone from black to that deep bruised blue that comes right before actual morning. She rode in past the feed store, past the hardware, past the saloon, which had its shutters still closed but was already producing sounds that suggested someone inside was having a complicated relationship with the previous evening. She was looking for a blacksmith shop, which, in a town the size of Cedar Falls, should not have been difficult to find, except it was 5:30 in the morning, and nothing was open, and she hadn't thought about that. She sat on Salt in the middle of the main street and looked at the closed storefronts. Right. People slept, normal people, with normal schedules and nothing chasing them across 22 miles before sunrise. Slept until at least 6, maybe 7. And a retired blacksmith, which was what Emmett Krause might be, if he was still alive, if he was still here, probably didn't keep early hours anymore. She had not planned for waiting. She was not good at waiting, but there it was. She found the livery at the north end of town, roused a barely awake stable boy, and paid to have Salt watered and fed. Then she found a bench outside the general store and sat down with her bread, and her dried venison, and her canteen, and watched Cedar Falls slowly remember that it existed. A woman came out of the house across the street and threw wash water into the road. A dog investigated the splash. 2 men emerged from separate buildings simultaneously, glanced at each other, and went separate directions without speaking. Small-town morning, the same everywhere. Marin ate her bread and waited. She asked at the general store when it opened at 7. Emmett Krause, blacksmith. Would have been working here in 1869. The owner, a narrow man with excellent posture and the expression of someone perpetually expecting bad news, said yes. He knew Emmett Krause. He was 71 now, retired. Lived on the south edge of town in the small house with the red door. Is he well? Marin said. His hands shake. The man's mouth doesn't. You'll know when you find him. The house with the red door was exactly where described. Small, well-kept. A garden in the front that had been properly put to bed for winter. Straw mulched, stakes pulled, nothing left to die badly. The garden of someone who respected the work, even when the work was finished for the season. She waited, knocked again. The door opened. Emmett Krause was 71 years old, and built like a man who had spent 50 of those years hammering iron for a living. Shorter than she'd expected. Broader. White-haired now, with a beard that had given up trying to be one color and settled into a comfortable gray-white mixture. His hands at his sides did in fact tremble very slightly. Not a lot. The kind of tremble that was noticeable only if you were looking for it. He looked at Marin. She was 6'2" in her work boots on his front step. He looked up at her without any particular adjustment in his expression. You're tall, he said. Yes, come in, he said. I'll make coffee. She sat at his kitchen table. He moved around the small kitchen with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had learned where everything was and saw no reason to change it. The stove was already warm. The coffee was ground. He poured water, settled the pot, and sat down across from her. You're not from Cedar Falls, he said. Stone Creek, she said. My name is Marin Voss. I came about land. Something shifted in his face, not alarm, more like recognition. The look of a man who has been waiting, distantly, for a particular conversation to eventually arrive. Voss, he said. Heinrich Voss was my husband. He died in 1874. A pause. I'm sorry for that, Krause said. And he meant it. She could hear it. Not the reflexive courtesy people offered. The real kind, that came from somewhere. He kept good records, Marin said. She reached into her saddlebag and placed the field notebook on the table between them. Krause looked at it for a moment. Then he reached out and opened it. His hands shook slightly as he turned the pages. He moved through them carefully, not fast. He was reading, not skimming. He reached March 1869, found the entry dated the 14th. He read it, looked up. That's my signature, he said. Yes, I was there, he said. I remember that day. Your husband, he was careful. He asked me to sign 2 places, his notebook and the county form. I signed both. Marin felt something in her chest settle very quietly, like a board that had been slightly warped, finally finding its true level. The county form only shows one witness, she said. A man named Wicks. Kraus set the notebook down. Harmon, he said. Excuse me? The clerk that day. Name was Harmon, young man. Nervous. Kept dropping things. He paused. I gave him my signed copy directly. He said he'd file it. It's not in the county record, Marin said. A long quiet. The coffee pot began to make sounds. Harmon left the county office in 1870, Cruz said slowly. I heard there were some problems with the records from his time there. Things filed wrong. Things not filed at all. This is one of those things, Marin said. He looked at her. What do you need from me, he said. A signed affidavit confirming you were present. That you signed. That you witnessed the registration. And if I give you that, then the record is complete, she said. And the challenge fails, he stood. Went to the stove, poured 2 cups of coffee, brought them back. Set one in front of Marin, sat down. Picked up his own cup. Get me paper, he said. There's some in the drawer behind you, he wrote slowly. His hand shook, but his lines were clear. He described the day specifically, the time of morning, the layout of the clerk's office, the order in which things had been signed. He described Heinrich Voss as a careful man who explained exactly what he needed and why, and who thanked him plainly afterward. He described signing the county form, handing it to Harmon, watching Harmon set it on the pile to his left. He signed the affidavit at the bottom. His hand shook on the signature, but the name was legible. Every letter of it present and accounted for. Emmett Cruz, Cedar Falls, Kansas. October 1877. He folded it and held it out. Marin took it. Your husband was a good man, Cruz said. I didn't know him well, but I could tell. He wrote everything down, Marin said. Smart man, yes, she stood. Extended her hand. Thank you. He shook it, firm despite the tremor. The handshake of someone who had spent a lifetime doing things that required conviction. You rode from Stone Creek this morning, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Before 5, he looked at her. That same look as when she'd first appeared at his door. Not surprise exactly. More like the satisfied acknowledgement of something that made sense. Your husband was a lucky man too, he said. She was back on Salt and moving by 9:30, 22 miles home. The affidavit was inside the field notebook, which was inside the canvas wrap, which was inside the saddlebag. She was aware of it the way she was aware of the deed on her wall at home, as a physical fact that was also something else. A piece of paper that was also a reckoning. She rode fast this time, not because she was afraid, because the problem had a solution, and the solution was in her bag, and there was work to do. She was 3 miles from home when she saw the second set of tracks. Fresh. 2 horses. Coming from the eastern trail, heading toward Stone Creek, she pulled Salt to a stop, looked at the tracks. Then at the road ahead, pressed Salt forward. Faster, the yard was empty when she arrived. No horses, no visitors. She dismounted, checked the barn. Everything in order. Checked the house, door closed, nothing disturbed. She came back out and saw Elias Cord coming around the west side of the property from the direction of the creek, on foot, alone. He saw her at the same moment. Where have you been, he said, not an accusation. Flat delivery. But something underneath it that wasn't quite flat, Cedar Falls. She said, since when? Since before 5 this morning. He was quiet. I came to check the dam before the week's cattle movement, he said. You weren't here. I didn't know you were coming. I didn't know you were leaving. A pause between them that had several things in it. I found Emmett Kraus, she said. She patted the saddlebag. He was there in 1869. He signed. He remembers. Something changed in Cord's face. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of change you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. A slight release around the jaw. A steadying. He's still alive, Cord said. 71. Hands shake. Memory's fine, and he'll swear to it. Already did, she said. It's in writing. He looked at her for a long moment. You rode 44 miles today. There and back, yes. Before breakfast, I had bread. Another pause. This one felt different than the previous ones between them. Warmer. Or maybe just less guarded. Come inside, she said. I'll put water on. They sat at the kitchen table. The same table where she'd sat with Devlin Harp. The same table where she'd found Krause's name in Heinrich's notebook. The same table where she did every piece of thinking that mattered. It was a good table. solid. Her father had built it. She set the notebook and the affidavit on the surface between them. Cord read both without touching them first. He looked at her before he reached for them, a small thing. The kind of small thing you only noticed when you'd spent time around people who didn't bother with it. He read carefully. The same focused attention he'd given the fence posts, the water levels, the lease clause she'd corrected. Harmon, he said. When he reached the part about the clerk, you know the name. I know there were filing problems from his time in the office, Cord said. 3. 4 other homestead claims had issues. 2 of them were resolved. 1 wasn't. What happened to the one that wasn't? A pause. The family sold, he said. Before they understood what the issue actually was. Marin looked at him. Harp, she said. Cord didn't answer immediately. Which was its own answer. He told her then not everything at once. Cord didn't operate that way. He assembled information the way he assembled fence line, section by section, checking each connection before moving to the next. But the shape of it was this. Devlin Harp had been operating in Cimarron County for 2 years. 14 properties acquired, in most cases, distressed owners, drought losses, debt family situations. He was good at finding people at their lowest point and appearing shortly thereafter. But 3 of those 14 had not been simple distress cases. 3 had involved land registration irregularities from the 1869-1871 period. The era of Clerk Harmon, all 3 had been resolved in Harp's favor, because in all 3 cases, the owners had not known. They had a second witness whose signature existed somewhere other than the county record. He researches the filings before he goes, Cord said, finds the ones with procedural gaps. Then he approaches. He lets the owner say no once, sometimes twice, and then he reveals the gap. By that point, they're rattled. They don't know if the gap is real or what it means. And he's there with a clean offer and a reassuring manner. How do you know this? Marin said. Because Aldrich's brother-in-law was one of the 3, Cord said. He sold, lost the property, came to understand afterward what had actually happened. He paused. Took me 6 months to find out the full picture, and you didn't say anything, Marin said, not an accusation. A question, but a real one. I didn't know Harp had found your claim, Cord said. Not until Aldrich told me 3 days ago. Marin looked at him. 3 days ago, she said. The same day you received his second visit, she thought about that. Calculated the timeline. You came to check the dam today, she said. Yes, but you also came because you knew Harp had been here and you wanted to know what was happening. He was quiet. Yes, he said. It was a small word, just yes. But it sat on the table between them, alongside Heinrich's notebook and Emmett Cruz's affidavit, and meant something. Because this man did not explain himself easily. She had understood that from the first conversation. He had been on her property 4 separate times, and each time he had said exactly what was necessary, and nothing that wasn't. And now he was sitting at her kitchen table, saying yes to a question that admitted he'd been paying attention to something beyond his water rights. She looked at her hands on the table. There's something else, she said. Something you came to tell me. A pause. Yes, he said again. The railroad. She had not known about the railroad. Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. The extension survey that had been quietly commissioned 6 months ago. The route that had been mapped and revised and remapped, and which had, in its most recent revision, been routed through the Cimarron County Valley corridor, through Stone Creek Valley, through the northwest corner of her property in particular, where the terrain was flattest and the grade most favorable for track laying. The land that was worth $1,500 as a cattle range was worth something considerably different as a railroad right-of-way corridor. How much different, she said. 10 times, Cord said. Possibly more, depending on how the negotiations go when the survey is made public. 10 times, $1,500 becoming $15,000. Maybe more. Marin sat with that number in the kitchen where she had made difficult calculations for 3 years. Harp knows, she said. He works for a land acquisition firm that has a contract with the railroad. They buy the land before the route is announced. Railroad pays the firm. Firm keeps the margin. And the margin is, she said, Everything between what he paid you and what the railroad pays him. Marin looked at the wall where Heinrich's deed hung in its cracked frame, not decoration. He'd always said that, proof. She looked at it for a long time. He came to me twice, she said, before the legal threat. 2 visits where he made a reasonable offer, and I said no, and he left politely. Yes, he was building a picture of me, she said. For the visits after, he needed to know how you'd respond when the pressure changed. He was calibrating, she said. Yes, she thought about the way Harp had looked at her. The way he'd collected information with his eyes while his mouth stayed pleasant. The way he'd said I understand and of course and departed without argument. He hadn't been accepting her answer. He'd been studying her. The fire in the hearth needed attention. She got up and fed it 2 logs without hurrying. Stood with her back to Cord for a moment, watching the fire take hold. Then she turned around. He comes back at the end of the week, she said. I know. With the legal threat and presumably an escalated offer, that would follow his pattern. And if I have the affidavit and the notebook, she said, the legal threat has no ground. Correct. But he doesn't know I have them yet. Cord looked at her. She could see him working through the same calculation she was working through. He'll come Friday, she said. With his attorney. Confident that I've spent the week frightened of a legal challenge I don't know how to fight. Yes, and I won't be frightened. No, Cord said. You won't. A pause. I'd like you to be here, she said. Not to speak for me. To stand behind me, he looked at her steadily. I'll be here Thursday evening, he said. With Aldrich, just you, she said. Aldrich if you want him, but not a show of force. I don't want Harp to think I needed an army. You didn't, he said. I know that. I want him to know it too. He left before dark. She stood in the yard and watched him ride the creek trail back north. The sky was going amber and deep rose at the edges, the way it did in October when the air was clear and cold, and not yet ready to let the light go. She went inside, made supper, sat at the table with her ledger after, and wrote October 22, 1877. Emmett Cruz found, affidavit signed, memory intact. Signature clear. Cord told me about the railroad. AT and SF extension. My northwest corner is on the route corridor. Harp works for a land acquisition firm under contract to the railroad. He's been buying low, selling high, using the announcement gap. Harp returns Friday. I will be ready. Cord will be here Thursday. I asked him to stand behind me. Not beside me, behind. He said yes without making it complicated. She paused, then wrote, that is rarer than it sounds. Thursday came with a hard frost. Cord arrived at dusk. Alone, he'd left Aldrich at home, as she asked. He tied his horse at the fence and came to the door and knocked. Which he hadn't done the last times. She noticed that. She opened the door. Any sign of them early? He said. Nothing. Good. He came in. She had coffee on. They sat at the table again, the same arrangement as before, but something was different about it now. Less like a business meeting. More like 2 people who had gotten used to the shape of each other in the same room. Not comfortable, exactly. Cord wasn't a comfortable person, and she was not someone who particularly needed comfort in her surroundings. But that was the word. Steady. Tell me about Aldrich's brother-in-law, she said. He looked at her. Why? Because I want to understand what Harp does after he wins, she said. If the person sells. What happens to them? A pause. His name was Garrett Dane, Cord said. Good man. Homesteaded in 1868, east of the county line. Harp approached him in 75. Same pattern, plausible deficiency, deadline pressure. Jarrett sold. Took the money. Tried to start over in Nebraska. And Nebraska was hard, Cord said simply. He's managing. But he lost 8 years of work. The soil knowledge, the water mapping. All of it gone with the deed. Marin thought about 8 years of work. She thought about what it meant to know a piece of ground. Really know it. The way a creek ran in February versus July, where the soil went clay-heavy and where it stayed workable. Which fence lines the wind hit hardest, where the garlic did well and where it sulked. That knowledge didn't transfer. You couldn't pack it in a trunk and take it to Nebraska. It lived in the land or it disappeared. He won't get mine, she said. Not loud, not heated, just clear the way a fact states itself. They talked for 2 hours. About the AT and SF survey route and what it meant for the broader valley. About water rights post-railroad, because rail construction would affect the creek drainage significantly. About what Harp was likely to try in the morning when the legal threat didn't land the way he expected. Cord thought Harp might escalate, offer more money, or try a different angle, approaching the county recorder directly, suggesting the deficiency be formally logged before any private resolution occurred. Marin thought Harp would simply stand and wait. "He's very good at waiting," she said. He waited through 2 refusals before he showed the legal card. If that card doesn't play, he'll recalibrate. He'll look for the next lever. "What's the next lever?" Cord said. "Me," she said. "Specifically, my position. A widow alone on a contested property. He'll try to make the county uncomfortable with my claim. Suggest it needs formal review. Create delay and uncertainty while the railroad timeline advances. And if the affidavit is presented immediately, then there's nothing to review," she said. "The claim is complete. Delay serves no one." Cord was quiet. "You've mapped this," he said. "I've been mapping it since Monday," she said. "Since before Monday, actually." Since the first night he came, he looked at her. The fire was lower now. The lamp between them made the kitchen feel smaller than it was, in the way that lamplight does, pulling everything into a warm, contained circle. "Marin," he said. It was the first time he'd used her given name. She looked up. He seemed to notice that he'd done it. He didn't comment on it or walk it back. "When this is over," he said, "I want to talk about the arrangement between us. The easement, the lease, what it might look like if it took a different form." She looked at him for a long moment. "After Friday," she said. "After Friday." He agreed. She showed him to the door. He put his hat on. "I'll be in the east barn at first light," he said. "You won't see me until Harp arrives." "Good, Marin." She looked at him. "You went to Cedar Falls alone," he said. 44 miles. Found the man, got the paper. Came home? "Yes, I want you to know I noticed that," he said. "Not because it was remarkable. Because it was right. And the right thing deserves to be seen." She stood in her doorway for a moment. The night was very cold. Very clear. "Good night, Cord," she said. "Good night," he said, and walked to his horse. She did not sleep much. Not from fear, she was past fear mostly. The fear had come and gone in the space of one evening when her hands had trembled on the kitchen table, and she had looked at them and decided that her hands were going to do what she told them. What kept her awake was the quality of the waiting. The particular tension of knowing a thing was coming and being prepared for it as well as possible and having now to simply let it arrive. She lay in the dark and ran the sequence. Harp would come mid-morning, probably between 9 and 11. He'd want the light clear and the hour respectable. He'd bring Fenn, the attorney, possibly 1 or 2 other men, not for intimidation exactly, but for the social weight of having witnesses. She would open the door, she would be ready, and behind her, somewhere in the east barn or at the edge of the fence line, Elias Cord would be there, not to speak, not to act, just to stand. The way a good post stands in the ground, you don't notice it until the wire is tested, and then it's exactly where it needs to be. That was what she'd asked for, and that was what he'd agreed to. Friday morning, she was up at 4 again. Not from habit this time, just from the simple fact that she was done with the dark and ready for the day to start. She banked the hearth, put water on, and made proper coffee rather than the thin brew she allowed herself on ordinary mornings. She ate well. Eggs from the 2 remaining hens, bread she'd made the day before. She dressed carefully, not finely. She didn't own fine clothes and wouldn't have worn them anyway. Because this was her working land and she was a working person. And she would meet Devlin Harp the way she met every problem. In what she actually wore, on the ground she actually stood on, but she laced her boots fully, tied her hair back cleanly, took her canvas work jacket off its hook and put it on and buttoned every button. She took Heinrich's notebook and Emmett Krau's affidavit and placed them in the inside breast pocket. Then she went outside, cold clear. The kind of October morning where every edge is sharp and the light hits the ground at a low angle and makes ordinary things look like they matter. Fence posts, dried grass, the brown cottonwood leaves that hadn't fallen yet. She walked the fence line, chalked the posts Aldrich's crew had set. all firm. She tested 3 of them the way she always tested, pressing both hands against them at chest level and pushing. Not one moved. 6 inches deep. Her father had taught her that. She walked to the creek, looked at the dam. The section Cord had identified needed drainage management. She'd put it in the weekly report, and he'd responded with 3 lines about upstream deflector placement. She would deal with that section after Friday after. She came back to the yard and stood in the center of it, waited. She heard them at 10:30, 2 horses, maybe 3. Coming from the eastern trail, the same direction Harp always used. Marin stood where she was. She was in the center of the yard, about 15 feet from the gate. She had nothing in her hands. She was not leaning against anything. She simply stood at 6 feet 2 inches in the October light, waiting. Harp came through the gate first, then Fenn, the attorney with his satchel, then 2 other men Marin didn't know. Not ranch hands, not lawyers either. The kind of men who stood behind other men as a reminder that other men existed. Harp took in the yard, the fence, straight and solid. The barn roof, repaired. The garden properly laid to winter. The woman at the center of all of it not moving. He came forward. "Ms. Voss," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Harp." He looked past her, briefly, scanning the property. Looking, she understood, to see if she was alone. She was not alone. At the far edge of her peripheral vision, just inside the fence line near the barn, Elias Cord stood with his arms at his sides. Not approaching, not positioned threateningly, simply present. The way a mountain is present. You don't decide whether or not to notice it. It's just there. Harp saw him. Something moved behind his eyes. "Mr. Cord," he said, his tone only slightly different. "Didn't expect to see you personally." "I inspect my water easement personally," Cord said. "Creek runs through this property. What happens here concerns me." Harp turned back to Marin. "I've come, as promised, to discuss the status of the property," he said. "Mr. Fenn has prepared the formal documentation regarding the registration concern we discussed." "I know," Marin said. "Given the time you've had to consider, I found Emmett Krause." She said, silence, conflict, and immediate. Harp's expression did not change, but the space around his expression changed. Something went very still. "Cedar Falls," Marin continued. "He's 71. His hands shake. His memory doesn't." She reached inside her jacket and removed the field notebook and the affidavit. Held them at her side. Did not extend them yet. Just held them. "He signed the registration form for my property in March of 1869. He remembers doing it. He remembers handing it to Harmon. He has now signed an affidavit confirming all of that." She extended the affidavit. Harp did not take it immediately. His attorney, Fenn, stepped forward and took it instead. "Read it. Read it again." His face did the complicated thing that lawyer faces do when a document is saying something they did not want it to say. He leaned toward Harp. Said something quietly. Harp looked at the affidavit. Then he looked at Marin. "The registration deficiency," he said carefully, "does not exist." She said a pause. "The county record is incomplete," she said. "It was incomplete when Harmon left the office in 1870. That has now been remedied. I will be filing the affidavit with the county recorder in Cedar Falls on Monday, after which the record will reflect what was always true." Harp was quiet. Behind her, she could feel rather than hear Cord. Just his presence. A fixed point. "I see," Harp said finally. "I imagine you do." She tried once more. She'd expected it. "The offer remains on the table, Miss Voss. Circumstances change, and $1,500 has never been what this land is worth," she said. His eyes sharpened, just slightly. "Just for a second, Miss Voss," he said. "Perhaps you're unaware of the current market." "I know about the AT&SF survey," she said. Complete silence. Even the 2 men behind Harp went still. "The route corridor through Stone Creek Valley," she said. "The northwest corner of this property is on the preferred grade. You know what a railroad right-of-way acquisition pays per acre." She held his gaze without effort. "I do now, too." Harp looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Cord. Cord said nothing. He didn't need to. Harp turned back to Marin. The smile he'd been carrying, that careful, calibrated, lightly threatening smile, did something then. It didn't disappear. It became something else. Simpler. More honest, strangely. "You're going to be a difficult woman to do business with," he said. "I'm going to be impossible," she said. "For you specifically." A pause. He tipped his hat. And that was it. He turned his horse. His attorney followed. The two men behind them followed the attorney. Marin watched them take the eastern trail. Watched until the last horse disappeared around the cottonwood stand. Then she let out a breath. Just one. Long and slow. And stood in her yard in the October light. On her land. With her fence and her barn and her creek. And her name still exactly where it had always been. On the wall, where it was going to stay. Cord came to stand beside her, not immediately. He gave her the moment. Which was the right thing to do. Then he walked across the yard and stopped a few feet away. "Aldrich told me once," he said, "that the first time he saw Harp leave a property without the paperwork, he nearly fell off his horse." She looked at him. "That was the first time you saw it," she said. "Yes. How did it feel?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Like something that was supposed to happen," he said. "Finally did." She looked back at the eastern trail. Empty now. Just the road and the cottonwoods and the sky going the blue of deep October. "After Friday," she said. "After Friday." He said. She nodded, turned and walked back toward the house. Behind her, she heard him follow. Not close. Not crowding. Just there. Saturday came quietly. No frost. No wind, just a pale gray morning that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to be. The creek ran low and steady. The cottonwoods stood without moving. Even the hens were subdued, which was unusual, because the hens had opinions about everything. Marin was in the garden before 6, not because there was urgent work. Because she needed to be outside. Because the inside of the house felt too still after the week she'd had. And stillness after that kind of tension has a particular weight to it. Not heavy, exactly. More like the silence after a door slams. The absence of the sound is its own presence. She turned the first garden row with a fork, methodical. One tine width at a time. And thought about what Cord had said, after Friday. It was after Friday. She thought about it the way she thought about all serious things, carefully, without hurrying herself to a conclusion. The way you approach a piece of ground you haven't mapped yet. Walking slowly. Taking note of what's there, what she knew about Elias Cord. He had come to her property because he needed something from it. That was the beginning. And it was honest. More honest than most beginnings, which dressed themselves up in courtesies before admitting what they actually were. He had written a contract clause in her favor before she'd asked. He had added a drainage protection she hadn't thought to request. He had told Aldrich that she would know the property better than the crew did. He had come Thursday evening when she asked. Stayed behind her Friday when she faced Harp. Said nothing he wasn't needed to say. And he had used her given name exactly once, in a kitchen at 10 in the evening, and not retreated from it. These were the facts. She turned the next row of soil, what she knew about herself. She had been alone for 3 years. Not unhappily, she had never been someone who found her own company wanting. But there was a difference between aloneness chosen freely and aloneness held together with will and wire, and she had spent enough of the latter to know what the seams looked like. She was 35 years old. She had 320 acres of land she intended to die on. In the good sense, working it until she couldn't, and then resting in the soil she'd tended. She was not interested in being saved. She was not interested in being managed. She was not interested in any arrangement where her name came second to something that wasn't already there before her. But a person could want something without needing it. Could choose something without requiring it to survive. Could say yes to a thing from a position of fullness rather than emptiness. That was different. That was, she thought, what Cord was actually proposing, though he hadn't used those words. Because he wasn't someone who used words he hadn't earned. She set the fork down, looked at the turned earth, dark and workable. Patient went inside to make coffee. The county recorder's office in Cedar Falls opened at 8 on Monday mornings. She was there at 8:03. Salt had made the 22 miles in better time than before. Because Marin knew the road now, and knowing a road is different from riding it blind. She'd left at 5, arrived with time to spare. drank bad coffee at a diner on the main street. While the town finished waking up, Amos Burkett ran the recorder's office. He was a small, precise man somewhere north of 60, with the careful hands of someone who had spent decades handling documents that mattered. His office was organized in a way that suggested he considered disorder a personal failing. Everything had a place. Everything was in it. He looked up when she came in, took in her height without comment. Good. She appreciated people who moved past it quickly. Maren Voss, she said, Stone Creek, Cimarron County. I need to file a supplemental affidavit for a homestead registration from 1869. He looked at her for a moment. Voss, he said. Stone Creek, yes. He went to the files. He knew exactly where to go. No hesitation, no hunting. He pulled a folder, opened it, and read for a minute. Then he looked at her over the tops of his glasses. The Harmon period, he said. Yes. A pause. I've been waiting for some of these to surface, he said. What do you have? She laid everything on his desk. Heinrich's field notebook. Open to March 14, 1869. Emmett Crusoe's affidavit. Signed, dated, specific. Burkett read both. He did not rush. He moved from one to the other and back again, with the focused attention of a man who understood that what he was reading was the difference between a woman keeping her land and losing it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he set both documents down and looked at her. The second witness was present, he said. His signature exists in the primary record holder's own documentation. The county file is incomplete due to an error in transcription by the clerk of record. The underlying claim was always valid. Yes, she said. I'll need to make certified copies of both documents, he said. And file a corrective entry into the county record. How long? 2 hours. She nodded, sat down in the chair across from his desk, and waited. 2 hours. Maren was not good at waiting, but she was getting practice. She watched Burkett work. He copied both documents in his precise handwriting. He cross-referenced the original registration. He wrote the corrective entry with the careful language of someone who knew it might be read by a court someday and wanted it to say exactly the right thing. At one point, he looked up. You rode here from Stone Creek. He said, yes. When did you leave? 5 this morning. He looked at her. Have you eaten? No. He opened his desk drawer and placed an apple on the edge of the desk nearest her. Said nothing else. Went back to writing. She ate the apple. At 10:30, Burkett set his pen down. The corrective entry has been filed, he said. Your original claim is confirmed complete. Both witnesses are now of record. The Stone Creek homestead, registered to Heinrich Voss and Maren Voss in March of 1869, currently held by Maren Voss, has no procedural deficiency. He handed her the certified copies. She held them. They were just paper, folded, slightly warm from the copy-making process, but they were. She understood. The sound of a door closing, the final close. The kind that locks. In 30 years of recording deeds in this county, Burkett said, I've seen a great many people fight for land they deserve to keep. He paused. And I've seen a great many lose it to people who were better at paperwork than they were. Another pause. You are not one of those people. Ms. Voss. She looked at him. My husband was meticulous, she said. So are you, he said. You knew where to look. She folded the certified copies and placed them inside her coat. Thank you, she said. Thank your husband, he said. And thank yourself. He turned back to his files. Come back if Harp tries anything through a different office. I'll know what to do, she stood. He won't, she said. Burkett looked at her once more over his glasses. No, he agreed. I don't believe he will. She was halfway to the door when it opened. Devlin Harp. Of course, because that was the shape of this particular week. Everything arriving at the last possible moment. Every confrontation scheduled by something other than her preference. He saw her immediately. Saw the recorder's office around her. Looked at Burkett behind his desk. His face did very little. That was the thing about Harp. His face was a tool he used, not a window into anything. It did what he needed it to do. Right now it did. Calm, unsurprised. Reassessing, Miss Voss, he said. Mr. Harp, she said. They were standing 3 feet apart, in a small office in Cedar Falls, and the air between them had the compressed feeling of a room where something important was finishing. I assume, he said, You've been filing. I have. The affidavit, among other things. He looked at her for a moment. Then at Burkett. Burkett looked back at him with the expression of a man who has worked in a government office for 30 years and is therefore immune to pressure applied through eye contact. Harp turned back to Marin. The railroad corridor, he said. When the announcement comes, and it will come, probably in the spring, your land will be approached by at least 3 different buyers. Some of them will be legitimate. Some of them will be what I am. She waited. Know the difference, he said. Before you sign anything, she looked at him. It was. She would think about this later. Perhaps the most honest thing he'd said to her. Not an apology, not a concession. Just a fact, delivered plainly. The way people sometimes speak when they've stopped trying to win. I read everything twice, she said. Always have. Something moved in his face. Brief, gone quickly. Yes, he said, I can see that. He stepped aside. She walked out. The ride home was different from the rides before. Same road. Same horse. Same 22 miles. But different. She'd ridden out twice now with a problem. She was riding home without one. And that absence, the absence of the thing you've been carrying, takes some getting used to. Like putting down a heavy bucket you've been holding for a week. Your arm doesn't immediately believe it. She let Salt set the pace. The sky had cleared during the morning, and gone to that particular shade of deep October blue that only appears after the summer haze burns away entirely. The kind of blue that makes things look farther away and more precisely themselves at the same time. She thought about what Harp had said. Now the difference. She thought about what Burkett had said. You knew where to look. She thought about what Emmett Krause had said as your husband was a good man. And a lucky one. She thought about the field notebook in her saddlebag. About Heinrich's careful small handwriting. About the night she'd sat on the floor of the bedroom and opened it. 3 years she'd been carrying his things without opening them. Not from grief exactly, or not only from grief. Also from a kind of faithfulness, maybe. The sense that opening the trunk meant something she hadn't been ready for it to mean. But the trunk had held what she needed. He had left her what she needed. Not on purpose. He couldn't have known. But through the simple habit of a careful man who documented everything. Who believed that the written record was the only thing that survived when memory failed, or people died, or clerks got careless. He'd written it all down, and she had learned it from him. And she had known where to look. She pressed her free hand against the saddlebag for a moment. The shape of the notebook through the canvas. I know, she thought, in the direction of something she couldn't name precisely. I know. Thank you. Salt's hooves on the road, the creek in the distance. Home ahead. She got back to Stone Creek in the early afternoon. The yard was quiet. The gate was closed. Everything as she'd left it. She unsaddled Salt, watered her, put her in the barn with fresh hay, then stood in the barn doorway for a moment, looking at the repaired roof. The fresh pine boards still lighter than the old ones, not yet weathered to match. Give it a season. They'd blend. She went inside, ate something, changed her coat, then sat at the kitchen table and opened the ledger. Monday, October 20, 1877. Corrective entry filed. Cedar Falls Recorder. Amos Burkett. Certified copies in hand. Record complete. Emmett Krause affidavit confirmed valid. County registration of Stone Creek Homestead, March 1869. Confirmed complete. Harp was at the recorder's office when I left. He did not attempt further business. The land is mine. She stopped right that last line back. The land is mine. She'd written it before. In this ledger, in other ledgers, in the back of her mind, on the worst nights of the last 3 years. But it had always been written in a kind of defiance, as something she was asserting against pressure. A position held. Today it was just true plain. Present tense and past tense and future tense all at once. She wrote one more line. Now. The rest of it. She heard his horse at 4 o'clock. She knew the sound of it now. The particular rhythm of that dark bell on the stone path that led from the creek trail to her gate. She'd learned it the way you learn sounds that show up repeatedly at important moments. She didn't go to the window. She put the kettle on instead. He knocked. She opened the door. He had his hat in his hand. She didn't know why that detail registered. He'd removed his hat before, but something about it this time was different. Like the gesture meant something it hadn't meant before. "Come in," she said. He came in. She poured water. They sat. "It's done," she said. "Filed this morning. Certified copies." "Burkett was thorough, I know," Cord said. "He sent word to Cedar Falls Post. You have contacts in the recorder's office. I have contacts most places," he said. "It's not something I'm proud of particularly. It's just how this county works," she looked at him.
"You used them for me,"
she said. "I asked Burkett to let me know when the entry was complete. That's all." "That's not nothing." "No," he said. "It's not." The kettle. She poured 2 cups, set one in front of him, a quiet between them that had a different texture than the quiet before. Because before, there had been something pending, something unfinished. Now the unfinished thing was finished, and what was left was what had been underneath it all along. "You said after Friday," she said. "Yes, it's Monday. It is." She held her cup with both hands. "Look at the steam, then say what you came to say," she said. He said it without preamble, without the kind of decorative language people use when they're buying time for courage. He said he had been watching Stone Creek Valley for 2 years, not her. The land, the water flow, the grade. He'd been interested in the creek corridor long before he knew who held the property beside it. When he'd ridden the trail in October and found the place, the farm, the swept yard, the stubborn October garden, he'd done what he told himself was a routine assessment stop. That was a lie, he'd told himself, for about Whitford days before he stopped bothering. He said the water easement was legitimate, and he'd have sought it regardless of who owned the land. But by the time he'd finished writing the first contract clause, he'd known the easement was not the primary thing he was interested in. He said he was 48 years old, that he had built something large and was finding that large things, at a certain point, stopped being interesting in themselves. What was interesting was what they were for, and he had not answered that question clearly until he'd sat at this table twice and ridden this trail in the dark and stood in this yard on a Friday morning and watched her face while Devlin Harp ran out of moves. He said he was not proposing rescue. He said he understood the difference. He said he was proposing, and this was the word he used, proposing, not asking, because what he was putting forward was a structure that required her consideration, not her permission, a permanent partnership between equals, on terms she would set. "Your land stays yours," he said. "That's not a concession. That's a condition of the proposal. I don't want Stone Creek because it borders my range. I want it because you built something on it that I respect. And you can't separate those two things." Marin looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them looked away. "I have conditions," she said. "I assumed you would," he said. "I'd be concerned if you didn't." She had thought about this too. Not as long as he had, probably, but since Thursday evening. Since he'd said after Friday, and she'd turned it over in the dark like a stone in her hand. Feeling its shape and weight, she'd thought, what would be unacceptable? What would make her say no immediately and without hesitation? And then she'd thought, what would she need? Actually need, not just want to test him with. Those were different lists. "Stone Creek," she said. 320 acres. My name on the deed. Alone. Not jointly with anyone. Not transferred or absorbed. My name. My title. Permanently separate. "Agreed," he said. "No hesitation. The East Range records," she said. "The water documentation I've been keeping. The creek monitoring, the bank reports, the drainage notes. That system stays intact and stays mine to manage. If we're joined in some way, that doesn't become a subordinate function. It stays what it is. Primary. I'd expect nothing less," he said. "Those records are more detailed than anything my ranch has produced on the same waterway. They'll be the foundation for every water decision we make for the next 20 years. She looked at him. "You've thought about the next 20 years, she said. "I have," he said. "That's a long time to have planned." "It's a reasonable horizon for a water agreement," he said. And then quieter, "And for other things." She held his gaze. "I don't become decorative," she said. "If this is a partnership, it's a real one. My name is in the room when decisions are made." My signature on anything that touches this land or the water it holds. Yes, he said. I mean it, she said. Not as a courtesy. Not as a gesture, Marin, he said. She looked at him. I sent my fence crew to work with you, he said. Not for you. Not at you. With you. That was not an accident. A pause. Aldrich told me what you said before they came, she said. That. I'd know the land better than they would. You did, he said simply. You said it before you'd spent a day on this property. I said, because it was obviously true, he said. From the first 10 minutes, she looked at the table, at her hands, at the ledger sitting closed beside the coffee cup. She had lived alone for 3 years and managed alone. Alone, and in most of the ways that mattered, been alone. And she was not. She had understood, unhappy with her own company. But she had been carrying weight that had 2 handles. And she had been carrying both handles for 3 years. And here was someone offering to take one handle, not to take the weight from her, not to carry it for her. To take one handle and walk the same direction and let them think be carried the way it was designed to be carried. By 2 people who knew what they were doing, she looked up. I have one more condition, she said. Say it. The deed. When it's registered, my name first. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face, not surprise. Something warmer. Something that had been there for a while and was only now allowing itself to be seen. I already planned it that way, he said. She did not answer that immediately. She was not someone who answered things that deserved consideration with anything less than consideration. She got up and refilled both cups, sat back down, looked out the window at the yard, at the fence, the garden, the barn roof with its fresh boards not yet weathered to match the old. Then she looked at Cord. All right, she said. 2 words. Just clear, the way a signature is clear. The way a fence post set at proper depth is clear. The way truth is clear, when you've stopped. Dressing it up in things it doesn't need, and extended her hand. He shook it firm, brief, the same as the first time except. Not the same. Because the first time had been the opening of a negotiation, and this was the close of one. And closings, when they're right, have a completely different weight. The next morning, she woke at 4 old habit. She lay in the dark for a moment, something she didn't usually do, because there was always something to be done, and the dark didn't change what it was, and looked at the ceiling. The ceiling was the same. The house was the same, outside. The same creak sound, the same fence line, and yet, something had been rearranged. Not in the house, in the arrangement of the days ahead, the horizon of the thing, which had been, for 3 years, a near horizon. Survive the winter, keep the deed, make it to spring, one season at a time, because further than that was too much to hold, and now she could see further. Not because Cord had given her something, because she had settled something that had been unsettled. She had kept the land. She had found the record and ridden the miles, and faced Harp in her own yard, and walked out of Burkett's office, with certified copies in her coat. She had done all of that, by herself, in order. And from that place, from that settled, solid, clear-eyed place, she had looked at Elias Cord and said, all right, not from need, not from desperation. Not from the particular loneliness that makes people agree to things that aren't right for them. From fullness. That was the difference. And it mattered more than she had words for at 4 in the morning, with the ceiling above her and the creek running outsides. She got up, made coffee. Opened the ledger. Tuesday, October 29, 1877. She looked at the blank space, wrote, terms agreed, partnership proposed and accepted. My conditions, Stone Creek separate, records mine, name first on deed. All 3 accepted without negotiation. This is what the word fair sounds like when it means it. The deed took a week to prepare. Cord had his attorney in Cedar Falls, a different man than Finn, older, with the unhurried manner of someone who'd been drawing up land documents for so long that the work had become a form of meditation. His name was Herschel Brand. He sent a draft by Ryder on Wednesday. Marin read it at the kitchen table with her coffee. The morning light coming in at the low October angle that made the pages glow slightly at the edges. She read every clause, twice. Found one point in the water management section that needed clarification. The language around seasonal creek maintenance was ambiguous in a way that could, in 15 years, become a dispute about who was responsible for which bank. She wrote her suggested revision in the margin. Sent it back with the writer. Brand's response came the next day. The revision had been incorporated, exactly as she'd written it. With a note at the bottom in Brand's careful hand, the record indicated any language suggested by Miss Voss regarding the water provisions should be adopted as written. He said, and I quote, "She understands that creek better than either of us." H.B. She folded the note, placed it in the ledger, did not make a fuss over it, but she thought about it for the rest of the morning. The final document arrived Friday. 1 week, exactly after Harp had ridden out of her yard and not come back, Cord brought it himself. On the dark bay, at a reasonable hour, mid-morning, not early enough to be a statement, not late enough to be delayed. She was in the garden when he arrived. He tied his horse at the gate and walked to the garden edge and stood there. He was carrying a flat document folder, the kind with brass fasteners. She straightened up, came to the garden's edge. He held out the folder. She took it, opened it, took out the document. The first line read, Voss Cord Ranch, Stone Creek, Cimarron County, Kansas, Marin Voss and Elias Cord, joint holders. Her name first, just as he'd said. She read the whole document, every paragraph. The water management section, with her revised language exactly as she'd written it. The Stone Creek acreage listed separately, held in her name alone. The management provisions. The partnership terms. She read it again, not because she'd missed anything, because it deserved 2 readings. Pen, she said. He produced one from his coat. She signed. Both copies. He signed beneath her name. She folded one copy and handed it back. Kept the other. Where will you file it? She said. Cedar Falls. Burkett. Good, she said. He's careful, I know. A pause. Marin. She looked at him. The deed doesn't go on the wall, he said. She looked at him. No, she said. It doesn't need to. She understood what he meant, and he understood what she meant. And neither of them needed to explain it further, which was one of the signs, one of the early reliable signs, that something is going to work. The deed on the wall was Heinrich's deed, her original proof, the thing she'd looked at every morning for 3 years, to remind herself what she was holding and why. This deed was different. This one didn't need displaying. It was just true, already true. In the land itself, in the terms agreed, in the handshake at the kitchen table, and the water record she'd been keeping for 3 years, and the fence post set at 6 inches, because her father had taught her that the fence that falls always falls, because the post was lazy at the bottom. It was already true in all the ways that mattered. The paper just said so. He filed it the following Monday, Burkett's office. Cedar Falls. The confirmation came back 2 days later. Record complete. Burkett had added one line at the bottom, in his careful hand, notable for its clarity. Marin read that and set the paper in the ledger. Of course it was clear. She'd written half of it herself. Spring came in March, slow. Testing the ground first, a warm day, then a cold snap, then another warm day, then 3 cold ones. This was how spring worked in Kansas, not a gift. A negotiation. Marin watched it. She knew the signs. It's a specific way. The garlic pushed through straw before anything else showed green. The angle of the morning light in the 2nd week of March, when it finally had enough height to reach the south wall. The sound the creek made when the ice at the edges started to let go. She planted the first garden row the 3rd week of March. Beans this year, along the east section. Squash in the center, rotating off the rye ground she'd fallowed the previous autumn. A new trial of winter wheat on the north quarter. She'd been reading about varieties that came out of the cold earlier, and she wanted to see how they handled the Stone Creek soil. She was in the south row when she heard his horse. She knew the sound of it, the way she knew the creek. Without having to look up, she kept planting. He came through the gate, tied his horse, walked to the garden edge, stood. Beans, he said. And squash, she said, rotating off the rye and the north quarter. Winter wheat trial, she said. New variety. I want to see the emergence timing against the creek temperature. A pause. That's careful thinking, he said. It's a trial, she said. It might fail. That's what trials are for. She pressed a seed into the dark soil, covered it, moved to the next mark. He came into the garden, just to the edge of the first row. He didn't walk into her planting. He crouched down and looked at the turned soil. "Good depth on the rows," he said. "My father taught me I know. You've mentioned him. He had opinions," she said. Most of them correct. She could hear the smile in that, without looking at his face. Which was, she was discovering, one of the things about knowing someone over time. You stopped needing to see every expression. You heard them. He stood up, which put him back where he always was when they were standing on flat ground, looking up slightly. 3 inches of air between the top of his hat and the level of her eyes. She had stopped noticing it sometime in the fall. She wasn't sure exactly when. "The crossing's holding," he said. "The deflectors worked, I know. I checked Monday, I know you did. Your report said so." She planted the next seed. "Corn this year or next," he said. It was half a question. "Next," she said. "This year I want to see what the squash does on that ground first." Fair. They were quiet for a while. The spring morning doing its work around them. The light still low but honest. The air cold enough to be real. "The cattle numbers for the summer easement," he said. "Aldrich's projecting 1,100 head through the south crossing in June. That's heavier than last year. The deflectors will handle it," she said. "Saw. Add a third stone anchor at the downstream edge. I'll mark the placement." Tuesday, she stopped planting, looked up at him. "You're going to do that every time, aren't you?" she said. "Do what? Say Tuesday when I haven't agreed to Tuesday." He looked at her. "Is Thursday better?" "Wednesday," she said. "Wednesday," he said. She went back to planting. He watched her for a moment, then crouched down again, picked up a clod of soil from the edge of the row, turned it in his hands, looked at it the way people look at things they want to understand. "This is good soil," he said. "Yes," she said. It always was. That evening she sat at the kitchen table, both ledgers in front of her, Heinrich's and hers, same shelf, same lamplight, the way they'd been since October. She didn't open either one. She just looked at them for a while. 2 books. Different hands. Same care, the past and the present not competing with each other. Just there. Together, taking exactly the space they needed. Outside, the creek ran the way it always had. From high ground to low, no argument, no drama, just the work of moving in the right direction. She blew out the lamp and went to sleep. There is a kind of strength that shows up before anyone is watching. It sweeps a yard no one will compliment, plants a garden no one will praise, sets a fence post 6 inches deeper than required, because the fence that falls always falls because the post was lazy at the bottom. It keeps records when there is no obvious reason to keep them. Reads every clause. Rides 44 miles in a day for something that is not negotiable. Stands at full height, all 6 feet 2 inches of it, in its own yard, in its own light, and waits for whatever is coming without flinching. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes that kind of strength meets something that recognizes it, just to stand beside it and say, "I see what you've built. I know what it cost, and I'd like to build something alongside it, if you'll allow me, on your terms, with your name first." And the strength looks at the offer rides it twice, adds a clause, and says, "All right, not because it needs to, because it's right." And the strongest agreements, the ones that hold through drought and frost, and men who arrive with smiles and documents and carefully measured threats, are built on that, on choice made freely, on terms set honestly, on 2 people who looked at each other across the distance of all their separate hard-won knowledge and decided that the view was worth it. Voscord Ranch, Stone Creek, Cimarron County, Kansas, registered spring of 1878. The deed not on the wall, both of them knowing exactly where it was.